Tombstone, Arizona wasn't just another dusty frontier town. It was a powder keg of greed, gun smoke, and gruesome realities hiding behind the legends. Long before Hollywood turned it into a symbol of bravery and justice, Tombstone was a place where the line between lawman and outlaw blurred dangerously, and everyday life could turn deadly without warning. From brutal mining conditions to deadly feuds, sinister scandals, and horrors the tourist brochures never mention, the real Tombstone was far darker than most people realize. If you love uncovering the true, gritty history of the American Old West, drop a comment below and tell me which Tombstone fact shocked you the most. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories the history books don't dare to tell. Founding. Ed Schieffelin spent a short period working as a scout for the U.S. Army based at Camp Huachuca. During his time in the territory, he often went off on his own into the wilderness, searching for promising ore samples and new mineral deposits. In the nearby Santa Cruz Valley, at the Santa Rita mines, 3 superintendents had already lost their lives in conflicts with local Native American groups, which made his exploration seem especially risky to others. When his friend and fellow Army scout Al Sieber heard about Schieffelin's plans, he reportedly warned him that the only stone he would find out there would be his own tombstone. In an earlier version of the story, Sieber supposedly told him to take his coffin with him because he would find his tombstone and nothing more. The remark later became part of the legends surrounding how Tombstone got its name. In 1877, Schieffelin used Bronco's cabin as a base while he surveyed the surrounding country. After months of work in the hills east of the San Pedro River, he eventually discovered pieces of silver ore in a dry wash on a high plateau known as Goose Flats. It took him several more months of patient searching to locate the main source of the ore. When he finally traced it to a vein, he estimated it to be about 50 feet long and roughly 12 inches wide. To move forward with formal claims, Schieffelin partnered with William Griffith, who agreed to cover the costs of filing in exchange for a later claim of his own. Griffith filed Schieffelin's first mining claim on September 3, 1877, and it was named Tombstone. Another version of the story, however, suggests that an initial claim called Graveyard turned out to be of little value, and that the more famous Tombstone claim came afterward. When the first claims were recorded, the earliest settlement consisted of tents and simple wooden shacks at a place called Watervale, near the Lucky Cuss mine. Around this time, the small community had about 100 residents. Not long after, the Goodenough mine strike occurred, increasing interest in the district. Former territorial governor Anson P.K. Safford offered financial support in return for a share in the mining ventures, and Schieffelin, his brother Al, and their partner Richard Gerd organized the Tombstone Mining and Milling Company. They built a stamp mill about 8 miles away, near the San Pedro River, to process ore from their holdings. While the mill was under construction, U.S. Deputy Mineral Surveyor Solon M. Alice completed a survey of the new town site in March 1879. The tents and shacks near the Lucky Cuss mine were moved up to the new location on Goose Flats, a broad mesa 4,539 feet above sea level, and large enough to support a growing town above the Goodenough mine. Building lots along Allen Street were quickly offered for sale at $5 each. Before long, the settlement included around 40 cabins and about 100 residents. From its official founding in March 1879, the new town took the name Tombstone from Schieffelin's original mining claim. By the fall of that same year, a few thousand determined residents were living in what was essentially a canvas and lumber camp perched over one of the richest silver discoveries in the Arizona Territory. When Cochise County was created out of the eastern part of Pima County on February 1, 1881, Tombstone was chosen as the county seat, giving it added political and economic importance. That same month, telegraph service reached the town, connecting it more directly to the rest of the country. In early March 1880, the Schieffelin's Tombstone Mining and Milling Company, which controlled the original Goodenough mine and the nearby Tough Nut mine among other properties, was sold to investors from Philadelphia. Only 2 months later, reports stated that the Tough Nut mine was working a silver vein about 90 feet wide. The ore was said to average $170 per ton, with some portions reportedly assaying as high as $22,000 per ton, figures that highlight just how rich the strike was considered at the time. On September 9th, 1880, the Grand Hotel opened its doors, becoming one of the showpieces of the town. It featured fine oil paintings, thick Brussels carpets, elegant washstands, ornate chandeliers, silk-covered and walnut furnishings, and a kitchen equipped with both hot and cold running water. Luxuries for a frontier community. At the height of the silver boom, when Tombstone's population reached around 10,000 residents, the town offered amenities comparable to many larger cities. Visitors could stop at Kelly's Wine House, which boasted 26 varieties of imported European wine, enjoy a beer brought in from Colorado known as Coors, purchase cigars, go bowling, and take advantage of many other comforts that made Tombstone as sophisticated as it was remote. Early conflicts. Beneath everyday life in Tombstone, deeper tensions added to the growing mistrust between different groups. Many of the men labeled as cowboys were former Confederates or their sympathizers, largely Democrats from the southern states such as Texas. In contrast, most mine owners, merchants, wage-earning miners, townspeople, and city officials, including the Earps, generally came from northern states and tended to support Republican politics. There was also a basic clash of lifestyles and economic priorities. The rural cowboys often favored a more traditional, southern-style, small government, agrarian way of life focused on open range and livestock. The mine operators and town leaders, on the other hand, embraced a more northern-style outlook centered on development, investment, and stronger governmental structures to support growth and infrastructure. In the early 1880s, smuggling and theft of cattle, alcohol, and tobacco across the nearby U.S.-Mexico border, roughly 30 miles, about 48 kilometers, from Tombstone, became common. Because the Mexican government imposed high taxes on these goods, moving them illegally across the border could be very profitable. This cross-border traffic in untaxed goods added to the overall disorder and weakened respect for formal authority in the region. Many of these activities were associated with loosely organized groups known as cowboys, who were often friends or acquaintances that joined together for various unlawful ventures and supported one another when needed. Contemporary newspapers reflected the concern of the time. The San Francisco Examiner wrote that cowboys represented one of the most reckless classes of outlaws in the area and described them as even more troubling than ordinary robbers. Because of this reputation, calling a legitimate cattleman a cowboy in Cochise County during the 1880s was considered an insult. Those who worked honestly with livestock were more properly known as cattle herders or ranchers. Despite the concerns about their behavior, the cowboys were still welcomed in town by many businesses because they spent money freely, even though their presence added to Tombstone's already unsettled atmosphere. Gunfight at the OK Corral. On the evening of March 15, 1881, three Cochise County cowboys tried to hold up a Kinnear and Company stagecoach traveling from Tombstone to Benson, Arizona, the nearest railroad shipping point. The coach was carrying $26,000 in silver bullion, worth about $847,152 in 2024 terms. Near Drew's Station, just outside Contention City, the attempt turned deadly. Driver Eli Bud Philpott, a well-liked and familiar figure, and passenger Peter Rohrig, who was riding in the rear dicky seat, both lost their lives in the incident. Deputy U.S. Marshal Virgil Earp, assisted by his temporarily sworn-in deputies and brothers Wyatt and Morgan Earp, moved to track down the cowboys suspected of involvement. Their efforts set in motion a series of events that eventually led, on October 26, 1881, to a highly publicized confrontation in a vacant lot owned by photographer C.S. Fly, close to, but not actually inside, the OK Corral. In that encounter, Tom McClory, Frank McClory, and Billy Clanton did not survive. The clash grew out of overlapping personal, family, and political disputes. 2 months later, on the evening of December 28, 1881, Virgil Earp was the target of a coordinated attack on the streets of Tombstone. Shots were fired from the second floor of an unfinished building, and he was seriously wounded. Although suspects were identified, they produced witnesses who supplied alibis, and no successful prosecution followed. On March 18, 1882, around 10 p.m., Morgan Earp was playing billiards at Campbell and Hatch's Saloon and Billiard Parlor on Allen Street, in what is still Tombstone's central business district. A shot came through a window, struck him, and he died as Wyatt looked on. Once again, names were put forward as likely participants in the attack, but those individuals avoided conviction due to legal technicalities and the limits of the justice system at the time. Wyatt Earp eventually concluded that formal legal channels would not deliver the outcomes he sought. With warrants obtained through the U.S. Marshal's Office, he organized a posse of U.S. Deputy Marshals and set out on what became known as the Earp vendetta ride. During this campaign, 4 men the group believed responsible for earlier attacks on the Earp family and their allies lost their lives. After the Earps left Arizona in early 1882, following the attempt on Tombstone Marshal Virgil Earp's life on December 28, 1881, and the death of Deputy Marshal Morgan Earp on March 18, 1882, reported cowboy-related crime in the area declined significantly. The departure of the Earp faction marked the end of one of the most turbulent chapters in Tombstone's history. In 1886, John Slaughter was elected sheriff of Cochise County and went on to serve 2 terms. He hired Bert Alvord, who as a 15-year-old had witnessed the famous confrontation between the Earps and the Cowboys, as one of his deputies. Alvord initially served capably for about 3 years, but over time he began drinking heavily and spending more time with known offenders. In this respect, he followed a pattern similar to former Earp-era Cochise County Sheriff Johnny Bain, who had been a close friend and frequent supporter of the law-breaking Clanton family and their associates. Silver mining. Tombstone grew rapidly, but its founder, Ed Schieffelin, remained more interested in exploration than in managing operating mines. He held a 1/3 share in his discoveries alongside his brother, Al Schieffelin, and partner Richard Gerd. Several hundred mining claims were staked in the surrounding district, though the richest producers lay just south of town. Among the most important were the Goodenough, Tough Nut, Contention, Grand Central, Lucky Cuss, Emerald, and Silver Thread. Because there was no dependable water supply close to Tombstone itself, ore processing mills had to be built along the San Pedro River, roughly 9 miles, about 14 kilometers away. This led to the creation of several small mill communities, including Charleston, Contention City, and Fairbank, all tied directly to Tombstone's mining economy. Schieffelin eventually left town to continue prospecting elsewhere. When he returned about 4 months later, Gerd had already arranged buyers for their interest in the Contention claim, which the partners sold for $10,000. That property would later prove to be worth millions in silver. They also sold a half interest in the Lucky Cuss, while the remaining half provided a steady income stream over time. Al and Ed Schieffelin later sold their combined 2/3 share in the Tough Nut mine for $1 million, and Gerd eventually sold his remaining 1/3 share for the same amount. These transactions reflected just how valuable the Tombstone district had become. Estimates of total production vary widely, but all agree the output was substantial. Tombstone's mines are believed to have produced around 32 million troy ounces, about 1,000 metric tons, of silver, more than any other mining district in Arizona. In 1883, writer Patrick Hamilton estimated that in the first 4 years alone, the mines generated roughly 25 million US dollars, equivalent to about 844 million US dollars today. Other calculations place the total value between 40 million and 85 million US dollars, or roughly 1.4 to 2.97 billion US dollars in modern currency. There have been periodic plans to revive mining in the area. One result of this great wealth was a surge in legal disputes. Between 1880 and 1885, courts in the region were crowded with cases, many involving land titles, overlapping claims, and property rights. Attorneys flocked to Tombstone and, in many cases, became even more prosperous than the miners and investors they represented. Because many lawsuits required accurate technical information about underground workings, geologists and mining engineers also found steady employment in Tombstone and chose to settle there. Their work eventually produced detailed maps of the entire mining district, making Tombstone one of the best documented mining areas in the American West. In the early years, mining itself was relatively straightforward. Ore deposits were close to the surface and rich in content, so a single miner in Tombstone could often extract as much ore as 3 workers might manage in less favorable districts. Some residents acquired considerable fortunes and spent freely throughout the boom period. Tombstone's first newspaper, The Nugget, began publishing in the fall of 1879. The Tombstone Epitaph followed on May 1st, 1880. As one of the fastest-growing boom towns in the Southwest, the influx of silver wealth attracted professionals, merchants, and entrepreneurs who brought their families with them. With these families came churches, clergy, and a strong Victorian influence that shaped social life and created a local elite. Many townspeople dressed in current fashions, and visitors often remarked on the surprising variety and quality of goods available in local shops for such a remote community. The workforce in the mines consisted largely of European immigrants, while many Chinese residents ran laundries and provided a range of other services. The rural cowboys operated in the surrounding countryside and engaged in cattle rustling operations that affected ranches and haciendas across the border in Sonora, Mexico. Because the planned railroad line never reached Tombstone, the town remained relatively isolated despite its growing sophistication, set deep within a federal territory that was still mostly desert and wilderness. Over time, Tombstone and its environs developed a reputation for instability and frequent disputes. Water remained a major challenge until the Huachuca Water Company, supported in part by investors such as Dr. George E. Goodfellow, completed a 23-mile pipeline from the Huachuca Mountains in 1881. Almost as soon as this essential infrastructure was finished, the silver mines began to encounter significant underground water, creating new complications for continued mining at depth. City growth and decline. By the middle of 1881, Tombstone had taken on the character of a thriving, sophisticated boomtown. The community offered fine restaurants, Vogan's bowling alley, and 4 established churches: Catholic, Episcopal, Presbyterian, and Methodist. Residents could also rely on an ice house, a school, the Schieffeland Hall Opera House, 2 banks, 3 newspapers, and an ice cream parlor. Alongside these respectable businesses, the town supported 110 saloons, 14 gambling halls, several Chinese restaurants, a number of French and 2 Italian establishments, many Mexican eateries, several higher-end continental dining rooms, and popular home-style boarding houses such as Nellie Cashman's well-known Rush House. Numerous brothels also operated in and around town. All of this activity took place literally among and above a cluster of hard-working, often rough mining operations. On March 15, 1881, the Arizona Telephone Company began setting up poles and lines to bring Tombstone its first telephone service, signaling the town's growing modernity. Around the same time, investors from the northeastern United States acquired many of the principal mining interests. The underground work itself was largely carried out by immigrant miners from Europe, especially from Cornwall, Ireland, and Germany. Chinese and Mexican workers provided many essential services, including laundry, construction, restaurant work, and hotel labor. However, the presence of immigrant labor also prompted backlash. In the 1880s, an anti-Chinese league was formed in Tombstone to organize boycotts of Chinese-owned businesses and workers. The mines and stamp mills generally ran around the clock in 3 shifts. Miners earned union-level pay of about $4 per day, typically working 6 10-hour shifts each week. With roughly 6,000 men employed in and around Tombstone, their combined wages totaled more than $168,000 per week, equivalent to about $5.67 million per week in today's money. Much of this income was spent on Allen Street, the town's main commercial thoroughfare, which operated essentially non-stop, 24 hours a day. Residents with more traditional tastes attended traveling stage and musical performances at Schieffeland Hall, which opened on June 8, 1881. For those seeking livelier entertainment, the Birdcage Theater opened on Allen Street on December 25, 1881. It catered especially to miners and cowboys, offering spirited shows and social gatherings. One of its featured attractions was Cornish wrestling, and the results of these contests were regularly reported back in the United Kingdom. In 1882, the New York Times famously described the Birdcage Theater as one of the most colorful and unruly night spots between New Orleans' Basin Street and San Francisco's Barbary Coast. The venue stayed open 24 hours a day, every day of the year, until it finally closed in 1889. Social customs in Tombstone also followed clear lines. Respectable women generally remained on the north side of Allen Street. Women working in the sporting profession were concentrated in the saloons on the south side and in the southeastern section of town, kept as distant as possible from the more formal residential neighborhood north of Fremont Street. By late 1881, Tombstone's population was reported at more than 7,000 residents, a figure that did not count Chinese or Mexican inhabitants, nor most women and children. At the height of the boom, official estimates climbed to about 10,000 people, with several thousand more likely unrecorded. Reflecting its growing importance as a regional center, Cochise County constructed a substantial courthouse in Tombstone in 1882 at a cost of around $45,000, further cementing the town's status in territorial Arizona. Fires. Because Tombstone grew so quickly, many buildings were constructed with limited planning and minimal fire protection, a common problem in western boomtowns. As a result, the community suffered two significant fires during the early 1880s. The first occurred on June 22, 1881, when a lit cigar accidentally set fire to a whiskey barrel inside the arcade saloon. The flames spread rapidly in the eastern half of the business district. About 66 establishments was lost. A second, even more destructive fire struck on May 25, 1882. It began in a Chinese laundry located on a 5th Street between Toughnut and Allen Streets. Before it could be contained, the fire consumed major structures, including the Grand Hotel and the Tivoli Saloon. The blaze then crossed Fremont Street and ultimately destroyed more than 100 businesses, wiping out much of Tombstone's commercial center. With insufficient water available to fight the fire, crews removed buildings in its projected path to slow the spread and reduce the amount of material it could consume. The total losses were estimated at around $700,000, a figure far exceeding the approximately $250,000 of insurance coverage available. Even so, rebuilding began almost immediately, driven by the optimism and determination typical of Boomtown residents. By March 1883, recovery was well underway. Along a single short stretch of Allen Street, visitors could once again find beverages and meals at numerous establishments, including bars within major hotels, Eagle Brewery, the Can Chop House, the French Rotisserie, the Alhambra, Maison d'Or, the City of Paris, Brown's Saloon, the Fashion Saloon, the Miners' Home, Kelly's Wine House, the Grotto, the Tivoli, and several additional unnamed saloons. Mines strike water. The Tough Nut Mine first encountered water in 1880 when small amounts began seeping into the lower workings. In the March 1881, the sulfurette mine reached a depth of about 520 feet, 160 meters, and also struck water. 1 year later, in March 1882, crews digging a new shaft in the Grand Central Mine encountered water at around 620 feet, 190 meters. At first, the inflow seemed manageable, but experienced miners warned that it would likely increase, and they were correct. Before long, the water rose faster than it could be controlled, and the standard 4-inch, 100-millimeter pump no longer kept up. The valuable silver ore bodies soon lay beneath rising water levels. To address the problem, several mine managers traveled to San Francisco to consult with the principal owners of the Contention Mine. They discussed ways to drain the deep mine shafts and concluded that only one proven system existed for depths below 400 feet. The Cornish engine, the same type of powerful pump used at the Comstock lode during the 1870s. Large Cornish engines were purchased and installed at both the Contention and Grand Central mines. By mid-February 1884, these massive machines were pumping an impressive 576,000 gallons of water every 24 hours. Local businesses celebrated the continued flow of money from the mining industry into the community. It soon became clear that the pumps at the Contention and Grand Central were removing water not just from their own mines, but from the entire mining district. Other mine owners benefited from this drainage but declined to contribute to the high operating costs. On May 26, 1886, disaster struck when the Grand Central hoist and pumping plant caught fire. The heat grew so intense that the Cornish engine's metal components melted and twisted, and the main shaft's surface structures were destroyed. Around the same time, the price of silver dropped to 90 cents an ounce, further straining the industry. Mines that were still operating began reducing their workforce. Many residents who had considered leaving Tombstone during the earlier flooding problems now made the decision to move elsewhere. Silver prices rose again for a short period, allowing a few mines to restart production, but the district never returned to the extraordinary output levels of the early 1880s. Tombstone may be a tourist attraction today, but its past is a reminder that the Old West was far stranger, harsher, and more unpredictable than the legends ever admit. Beneath the fame of the OK Corral and the tidy reenactments on Allen Street lies a history shaped by danger, ambition, and desperation. A place where fortunes rose and collapsed overnight, where law and disorder lived side by side, and where everyday life could turn unsettling in an instant. If these darker truths about Tombstone surprised you, drop a comment below and tell me which fact you never knew before. And if you enjoy exploring the untold stories of the American Old West, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There's plenty more history waiting just around the bend.